It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
You want something, go get it, period.
You gotta keep moving, let's keep moving, let's go. Don't quit until you got nothing left.
This is where we have been, this is how we got here, this is who we are.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
You're listening to the Hustle Indy Show, where we seek out some of Indy's most hustling people and places to learn about what they do, how they got started, and where they're going. Sit back and enjoy the show.
What is up, Hustle Indy Show listeners? I'm Brendan Helm, joined as always by the wonderful Ian D. Felice. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We're recording this on a Friday. I love Fridays.
Fridays are
I've
great.
got some great news from one of my best friends. He's staying in Indy a little bit longer than I'd expected.
Yep.
So just ending the week with some really good news.
Yeah. Always love Fridays, getting rock and rolling into the weekend.
Yeah.
Kind of starting to wind down with work and wind into relaxation mode. Got some family time tonight. We're going to play some games with the family.
Good.
Just relax, enjoy the weekend, and get ready for the next week ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This episode was with Jim Rawlinson, and very educational episode.
Oh, it was one of my favorite episodes just because I learned so much about the city that we claim to be promoting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like one of those things and not growing up here, I maybe didn't get the full experience of Indianapolis, but living here for a while, I feel like I've really gotten into it. But hearing his explanation of kind of where it's come from and the transition from being really nothing in a no city to all of a sudden, growing at such a rapid pace that we are at now, and everything in between was really, really cool. So I'm excited to be able to share that with you guys.
No, this is going to be a lot of fun for you guys to listen in on. If you don't know a lot about Indianapolis, or if you're curious about the history of Indianapolis, the development behind it, this is going to give you an inside look into what's going on in the business development, the music industry even.
Yeah.
Like, he has been inside and behind a lot of the stuff that's been going on in this city. And it's just really cool to sit and listen to this from an insider's point of view and just learn about the city that we love so much. So without further ado, we'll get you right to it. Looking forward to it. All right, well, today on this episode of the Hustle Indy Show, we have a special guest with us, kind of a jack of all trades. We would like to welcome Jim Rawlinson to the Hustle Indy Show. Jim,
hey guys.
Welcome, Jim. Hey. Welcome. How you doing today?
Good.
So we like to start off getting to know our guest and sharing with the audience kind of what you do and what got you to where you are today. So if you wouldn't mind, share with us just a little bit about who you are and what you've done and what you're doing.
Cool, yeah. So I'm on the economic development team with a company called the Veritas Group. We do consulting with mostly public entities, helping them with government services, real estate transactions. Really, our goal is to help municipalities get projects done that are complicated.
Gotcha.
Get things across the finish line. So that's my day job, and then I also am board chair of a group called Musical Family Tree, which is a 501c3 for artists in Indiana. We are in our 16th year. We have a music archive featuring tens of thousands of songs by Indiana artists dating back 4 decades.
Whoa, okay.
So if you go to musicalfamilytree.org, you can click through to the archive and listen to all that music streaming basically for free.
Whoa.
Wow.
We do a lot of stuff, so I could talk about that for a while. But so that's what I'm here to talk about.
Awesome,
cool.
Awesome. And then are you from originally Indianapolis?
Yeah, so I'm an Indy guy, born and raised. Grew up in Irvington.
Okay.
From a big Irish Catholic family.
Cool.
Went to Chittard, went to Marion, got my master's from IU.
Awesome.
Wow.
So yeah, I have a BA in history from Marion, and then a master's in public administration from IU PUI.
Wow,
Very
awesome. Cool. And so you've always been in Indianapolis from the beginning then?
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time in Bloomington, but
Sure.
Other than that, I've been an Indy guy.
That's awesome. So I kind of want to start off with that is what led you to stay in Indianapolis? Like what role does this city play in what we currently do?
Yeah, so Indy's always been obviously a place where I wanted to put down roots and make an impact. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately. So I grew up again on Irvington. We grew up in the 100 block of Washington Street, in the 80s and early 90s. And my family went back a couple generations there, and so they were kind of there for the building of it. It was, blue collar, upper blue collar type neighborhood. But it really crumbled and it fell apart when I was a kid. And so we moved out of the neighborhood when a dude got shot down on the corner, and there was, there like commercial was falling apart and the residential was following behind. And so we went a little bit north to the broader area, but still had, my grandparents and stuff were still on the east side. And then after college, I moved back to the east side, and that's where I'm raising my family. And so seeing, I've always been interested by what happened, like what made the city fall apart in the 80s, and then been super interested in watching it rebuild, starting in the 2000s, and then to be a part of that. So prior to my job now, I work for the Indy Chamber, and I was at Develop Indy, I was at Downtown Indy before that also, and so seeing projects like Bottle Works and
absolutely,
Criminal Justice Center even kind of come online, and the impact that they can have on neighborhoods and the community is super important to me and really exciting for me. So I think that sort of drove me to where I'm at.
So how long were you on the Chamber then?
So I was at the Chamber for 5.5 years. So I guess if we're doing my path to where I'm at,
your timeline.
It's not a straight line.
It never is.
No, yeah. So so I went to Stard. I went to IU. I had a really good time down at IU.
Yeah.
So then I went to Marion and graduated from Marion.
Very different schools.
Yeah, but again, I came up going to Catholic schools, and so I went to St. Matthew's in Stard, and I go to IPS before I went to St. Matthew's, but 56. But so going down to IU was like this huge, you can do whatever you want, and your class size or whatever. I never even met my advisor, and so going back to Marion felt a little more comfortable for me, and it was having been through one time, partied a whole bunch, and I was doing music stuff, and anyway, so I went to Marion, got my degree, and then I wanted to go to law school, but this was like the late 2000s, and so right around the economic collapse, basically. And so like I didn't have any money, and I knew friends that were going to law school, and just taking out insane student loans and that kind of stuff. And so I started off, I got a job, entry-level job at a law firm, just to kind of get my foot in the door and see how I could get to where I want to go. And worked there for a couple years, worked at a couple different law firms, and then I was at a company called Tabbert, Honors, and Weddle for a long time, like 4 years. And then they folded. A lot of mid-size and smaller law firms around that time were folding and rolling into bigger law firms. And it's just kind of, there's either big firms or small firms now. There's really nobody in between. But so anyway, that was all falling apart, and I was like, all right, this isn't what I want to do. But I sort of I knew I wanted to get into something to do with real estate and something to do with government services. And so I talked to some of the people that were there. We had a lobbying firm that was in the law firm then, and I was like, hey, I don't necessarily want to be a lobbyist, but I want to do I want to be in your world. And so they said, you need to go to SPIA and you need to get an MPA. And I was like, oh, I don't even know what that is. Right. So started looking into it a little bit, and then we had kicked around with some other like family members that were successful, and other people that my parents knew peripherally, and I just I emailed a bunch of people out of the blue and was just like, hey, I'm at a point where I don't know where I'm going right now, and I know where I want to get to, but can you help me figure out what my next step is? And so the consensus was, hey, you need to go get your master's and get your foot in the door somewhere else, right? So I went back. So I worked at IPL for a while doing IT tech stuff.
Okay.
Managing their copy center and a bunch of other stuff. And but I was really just doing that to get me through grad school. So got my MPA, got a internship actually working for Catherine Esselman.
Wow,
who was
yes.
in here,
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Who we knew each other from high school.
Cool.
But it's this long, weird, circuitous path to getting to where you are. So I was at the end of my my MPA program, and I needed to do an internship, and I said, I think this says C. Esselman, and like we weren't like good friends in high school, but we weren't, we didn't hang out
You
or
knew
anything,
each
but
other.
yeah, we
Yeah,
knew each
sure.
other. And I was like, I think this is Catherine Esselman that went to high school with me, and so emailed her and was like, hey, I need to do an internship, and I'd love to be at downtown Indy,
Yeah.
because I really liked their mission and what they were doing,
Yeah.
and I don't even know if you remember me from high school, and it was like this whole, totally, I remember you, and so then went there, and my long-term goal was that, so I had my eye on the Indy Chamber because they are at the center of everything in this city, and they are just driving so many cool efforts, and especially then.
So for those that don't know, can you explain what the Indy Chamber actually does? Because I'm somewhat familiar, but I probably don't know the details of what they actually do.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. But so the Indy Chamber is in the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce, really. But our Chamber of Commerce is not like most other Chamber of Commerces. So, there's... they do events and networking and that kind of stuff. They do advocacy for businesses. That's all kind of traditional in Chamber of Commerce stuff, right? And but what's special about the Indy Chamber is that they have economic development inside of the chamber, which is not a normal thing. So both regional and local economic development. So regional would be the 9 counties, Central Indiana region, and local would be Marion County.
Okay.
And I worked for Marion County. But then they also have entrepreneur services, which they do business coaching and they do direct loans, that kind of stuff. So for a long time, it was kind of this weird mishmash of like the stuff that was all important and relevant for businesses, but maybe didn't quite, it was a little Frankenstein together. But actually, when we got to when COVID broke out, and there was the economic crisis associated with that, it was like super amazing that all of those pieces were in one place and could work together and really address the crisis. So, so that's what the Indy Chamber does, and they do. They were at the lead for the Drive for Transit, which I was super passionate about, and super excited to be a part of that. We fought RFRA, which was the Right for Religious Freedom, whatever, the Mike Pence Act, trying to ban gay marriage, basically. So we were at the lead of fighting that and saying like, hey, this is not in the business interest of Indianapolis, and it's wrong. So Chamber's been at the front of a bunch of these major issues. Actually, they fought the Klan in the 60s. So our Chamber of Commerce really deserves a lot more credit than I think some other cities might. But so I knew there was a guy there, Michael Huber, who was a former deputy mayor, and I kind of knew some people that knew him, and I knew that I wanted to work for Michael Huber. So downtown Indy was on the same floor as the Indy Chamber. So I was like, wow, that could be really cool if I got in with downtown Indy. And either if I got hired by downtown Indy, that'd be cool, or if I could just, meet some people and figure out a way to the other side of the building, right? So I'd wander over to the other side of the building and introduce myself and hang out in the coffee room. And, got to know a few people there, and then so then my internship ended at the end of that year of whatever that was, and so then I had like a gap of a couple months, and at that somewhere in between there, a position opened up at the chamber, and I was like, oh crap! So I jumped on it, and it turned out that it was actually one of the people, this guy Luke Basso, that I had met when I was with Downtown Indy, and I was like, oh cool, it's I think that position would work with Luke and another guy, Marlon, that I knew there. And I was like, those guys are cool, I'd like to work with them. And but it turned out it was actually replacing Luke. Because he had left to go to the state.
Yeah.
And so then they hired me, brought me in to do I was the regulatory and permitting ombudsman for the city.
Okay.
And so helping businesses with zoning and permitting, anything like that. So, so then I was there for 5 years, 5.5 years. And then this past July, actually Marlon, who I'd mentioned before, had left to go to Veritas a couple years ago. And we stayed in contact, and Veritas was growing and doing a lot of really impactful work across the state. And so it seemed like a good opportunity to jump out and take it to the next level, right? So, so now we do, like I said, we're working in communities across the state, helping them develop their communities. So we do work in Plainfield. We're doing a lot of work in Hancock County right now, which is kind of, you might not know it from driving around there, but in the next few years, it's going to be exploding.
Cool.
They're seeing so much investment over there right now. So Hancock County, Greendale, Yorktown up in Delaware County. So all these smaller, mid-sized communities that maybe don't have a full-time economic development staff, or maybe if they do, they're focused on one thing specifically.
Yeah.
So we come in and help them, build their communities and with redevelopment projects and that kind of stuff.
So your whole career sounds like you are really focused on helping the community, not only that you've grown up in, but the surrounding communities around that. So like everything that you've done, and it's a vast different array of things, but it all kind of centers around the aspect of helping a community.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And has that kind of been like, is that what drives you to do that? Or like, what's your inspiration when it comes to like working in all these different positions?
Yeah, I this is gonna sound nerdy, but I'm almost 40, so I'm embracing it. I was an Eagle Scout. Like I was in Boy Scouts, really big deal. And my dad was a veteran and was a history teacher.
Oh wow!
And my parents were both public school teachers, and my grandpa was a big union rep and up in Muncie, and so I don't know. I've always felt this drive to help my community and to make an impact in civics, basically. So even since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be like, I never wanted to be a politician, but I wanted to work for the politician.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then that also, so we haven't even touched on the music aspect of this.
No,
Right.
Right. And it comes a little bit full circle, but so I would say that community aspect is also what drove me to become a part of Musical Family Tree, because the whole idea of Musical Family Tree is tracing the history of Indiana music and seeing how groups, so like if you go into the actual website, you can see, like you pull up a group, you pull up my band, and you can see the other bands that I was in, and then the other bands that other guys in my bands were in, and so you kind of see how everything comes together.
Yeah.
Right?
That's awesome.
So I always thought that was really cool, and so when there was an opportunity to join the board, I jumped at it. So
cool.
But yeah, I've been playing music since I was in high school, punk rock and heavy metal bands, that kind of stuff. Had my emo stint in the early 2000s. But
What instrument do you play?
I play guitar and
Cool.
I sing. Been in a bunch of different bands, but yeah. So I'm not doing anything right now because of COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
But so fast forward. So yeah, I've been doing music. Again, this is a little bit circuitous, but in high school I was in the punk rock band, and for me, punk rock is more than just like a type of music that I listen to or like a way that I dress. Like it's a community, and I think maybe sometimes people miss that if they're not like super involved, but especially in the late 90s there, and I'm sure it probably was afterwards, but I just wasn't involved, but there was a whole DIY ethic behind the punk rock scene, especially in Indianapolis. There was a venue called the Sitcom Collective, which was, I guess the closest comparison would be the Hoosier Dome right now in Indianapolis. I don't know if you've been there, but so it was an all-ages venue. But the special thing about Sitcom was that it was owned and managed by kids. So when I was there, I was like 14 or 15 or whatever. My parents had to drive me to shows, but like there were people that were older than me that like I thought were like 30. I'm like, these guys are grown-ups. They're running this whole thing. Yeah. And they were like 20. Like they were like 19 or 20. Maybe not even that. And because as I got older, I got to meet, now I'm friends with a lot of those people, and it's like, you guys were like just out of high school when you were doing this stuff. So anyway, that's kind of been another thing, like with my music, I'm pretty unapologetic about the fact that I just make music for myself.
Sure.
And I just, what I appreciate about local music and specifically is that, like, it's not always good. It's not always amazing. I mean, we do have some amazing musicians here, but like, it's people creating music for the sake of creating music. Yeah. And they don't see what they want in the world, and so they go out and make it, right? Yeah. So that was kind of what punk rock's always been about to me, is that like, you don't see the world the way you want it, and maybe you don't have the means to go out and, make some expensive record or whatever, but you're going to go do what you can do. You're going to run some crappy little venue that's like basically a dirty old basement, but like, you got bands in there, like Green Day played there, and like, huge bands started off that way, and like, you build a community that way. And I think things are different now. I'm not a kid, so I'm not hanging. I probably should not be hanging out with kids. But like, that whole community-minded, let's go out and make the world that we want to make it. Like, fairly political background of music is kind of in my blood too, and so that kind of drives. That also is a piece of like, hey, I want to make my community better. I want to make other people successful, and it's not just about going out and being a rock star or something like that, which is fine if that's what you're into, but that's It seems like there is a huge level of like, so when people are starting into new things or pursuing things, there's a hump of like preventing them from actually putting themselves out there and pursuing it. And it seems like you have a very gifted ability to just put yourself out there no matter what it takes, like reaching out and emailing someone who you're in high school with, like that even of itself, like at the surface seems so small, but for so many people that's a huge barrier that prevents them from stepping out and pursuing something. So it sounds like you've had like a history of putting yourself out there and just kind of putting yourself in the position where you need to be in order to pursue something. I mean, I think that can be good and bad. But I do think I raise my hand for a lot of things, and so that gets me, good and bad experience. But I think a lot of times, and I have to fight it myself, this like, oh well, they don't know who I am, or but like, really, you got to push yourself to break through to that next level and be like, hey, nobody wants a rejection, right? Like, it's but like, worst they can say is no, or not respond to your email, or like, especially email makes it so easy, because it's like, worst thing, they just never respond. Best thing, they respond and they help you out, right? And I've found that a lot of times people want to help you out if you make it easy for them, and you make yourself available on their schedule and that kind of stuff. I think a lot of times people sit around waiting for something to happen to them, and they don't want to go out and make something happen for themselves. And that's not, I mean, that could be taken the wrong way, in that like, there are a lot of barriers for, I'm a white dude, so there's a lot of barriers for people who don't look like me to achieve the success that they want. But I do think that for me, it's about just putting yourself out there and risking failure, and just keep moving. I don't know. That's
no, absolutely. And it's interesting because the other guests that we've had on this podcast, we've actually had a couple say very similar things about when it comes to community, about the Indianapolis community, and how I believe it was one of the guests, Casey Zink, who talked about how he's able to reach out to other gym owners, and he was a gym owner or wanted to be a gym owner, and he could easily just reach out to someone else, and it wasn't as much of a competition as it was like, hey, I need some help, do you have any advice on this? And I just wanted to get your take on it. Do you also see that maybe more so in this community than others, that people are able to do that? If you need help with something, like, you reach out, like you said, people are willing to do that, and is that kind of a benefit of being in this Indianapolis community?
I think so the easy thing to do, if you live in this area and you want to just have a comfortable, easy life, is to just live out in the suburbs and have a job and just like go to work every day and then come home and
Right.
deal with their family. And
Right.
that's probably the sane, smart thing to do. But, you know, I think people who specifically choose to live in Indianapolis are here because they want to make it a better place. And they want, like, I always, I had friends that I went to school with that would fly out to different, big cities, Chicago, New York.
Yeah.
Everybody left for Portland into late 2000s, right? And I was kind of like, man, that's such a bummer because you can go somewhere else and become, the same thing that everyone else is, or you could stay in Indianapolis and make something really cool.
Yeah.
And make a name for yourself. And I think that's the value of Indianapolis, at least from my generation. I think we've reached a point in the development of this city now where it's maybe getting actually a little bit harder to do that, which is really a good thing for the health of the city. But for a long time, Indianapolis just doing anything in Indianapolis was a big deal, right?
Yeah,
and so now we've got a ton going on, and because of all the development that's happened over the last 15 years, it's harder to get noticed and it's harder to break through. And that doesn't mean people shouldn't try, but
Right.
but yeah, so I think it's exciting to see where we're going to be in 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So like if you look at where we were in 2005, we were building the new library was a big deal.
Okay, yeah.
And the mall was cool. Like we were,
Yeah.
Peyton Manning Peyton Manning was coming into his own at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Indianapolis was still a pretty sleepy little town back
Right.
15 years ago. And
Then we held the Super Bowl.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
I
That
mean-
was a big turning point.
I think getting to hold the Super Bowl is almost a bigger deal than actually holding the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the fact that we were recognized at that level.
Right, right.
But yeah, over the last 15 years, just the insane amount of growth that we've seen is super exciting to watch, and then it just kind of takes everything to the next level. So
Yeah.
It kind of turned into, it seems like from the outside looking in, and I'm kind of at the point age-wise to where I am getting involved in the community after it's starting to like take away. But it seems like from the outside looking in, there was this realization of like, if we want this to develop, if we want this to be something, it's got to be a all hands on deck kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it seems like there was this reality at some point in time when people saw what something could be, came together and said, all right, we've got all kinds of people in unique positions to be able to build this and develop this. Let's do it. And it seems like we're at the point now where that's happening.
Yeah.
People are coming together. The commerce is working together. The chamber's working with other businesses. And there's this kind of like unity being developed in Indianapolis to where, like Casey said, there's no competition. Like, we're wanting to build and develop the city because that's the deeper issue at hand here.
Right.
And it's really cool to see that happening.
Yeah, I think there is both that like drive for collaboration that maybe you don't see in some other cities, but also there was, like I said, we were a little bit in a fake it till you make it type situation in the early 2000s. And it was like, well, could we get a Super Bowl? Like, oh, could we do this?
Yeah.
Like Indianapolis, now you got me rolling on Indianapolis history. But so Indianapolis literally was a plot point on a map. So it's not like Cincinnati, and it's not like Boston or New York or even Chicago, where it was like this community that grew up over time and because of the lake and trading and
Has
blah,
a
blah,
real
blah,
rich
blah.
history already behind it.
Yeah, Indianapolis was literally, when they were making the state capital was in Corydon, and they said, hey, this is way south, and we got a whole big state here. We should put it like right in the middle of the state. And that's literally what they did. They literally just picked the middle of the state, and they said, oh, well, this has a river running through it. Like, let's just put the city here.
Yeah.
And so the history of Indianapolis has always been about strategic growth. And so, and we've always been in this little bit of fake it till you make it type situation. We had a bunch of pre-war growth, and then like a lot of Midwestern cities saw a ton of disinvestment and people moving out to the suburbs. And we had something called Unigov, which had a lot of negative racial implications with schooling and that kind of stuff. But it did so it made Indianapolis into the county government and the city government are the same thing. And so Indianapolis is by far the biggest city in the state. Geographically one of the biggest cities in the country. Like, people don't realize that population wise we might be on par with a Cincinnati or Columbus or these kind of things. But geographically, we have this massive city with a complete lack of density. So
very much so.
what in a normal city, you would have Indianapolis, and then you would have, Broad Ripple, Nora, Irvington, Warren, Pike, whatever. Like, these would all be their own little towns that would be inside. They'd be Indy, but they would be basically, what Carmel and Zionsville are.
Sure.
But because they're in Indianapolis, they're all under Indianapolis government, and so they're all like, when we were smaller, it was a good thing, and now it's this huge hindrance because we have massive infrastructure issues, and we have tax revenue issues. We have, because of the lack of density, we don't have a lot of tax revenue coming in, and then it just becomes this cycle of, the schools aren't good, so I'm moving out, and then that makes the schools worse, right? And so then,
because everyone, when it comes to like wanting to start a family and go to school, it's like, oh, let's go to Brownsburg, or like let's get outside of that 465 loop.
Once you get into economic development, you start to understand how these things work, and so if you move out to a place like Brownsburg has a growing population, and so like that sounds like a really boring thing, and people might be tuning out now that I'm talking about it, but like it's super important when you're talking about how cities are managed, because especially in Indiana now, because we have property tax caps, and so because your income tax is based on where you live and not where you work. So even if you guys if you could work at Salesforce Tower in the middle of the city, if you live in Carmel, your tax revenue goes to Carmel.
Really?
Yeah, and so like that's not a normal. There's a few other cities that do that way, but Indianapolis is really one of the only places that does it like that. Not Indianapolis, sorry, state of Indiana. But that makes it a huge hindrance on how communities develop, and so every single person that moves to Carmel is a net add for Carmel and a net loss for Indianapolis.
Gotcha.
Right? And so it creates this divisiveness that shouldn't need to exist.
Right.
Where we're fighting for population, but it also creates this intense need for Indianapolis to develop. And so I think the people at the top get that, and they say that like it's more than just like we want to be cool and we want to have like, coffee shops and whatever, like we do.
Sure.
But at the bottom line, we need to add more people to our tax base so that we can afford to be a city. And pay for streets and sidewalks and street lights and that kind of stuff.
And so earlier you had mentioned you grew up in Irvington, correct? Yeah. And you said it had kind of gone down the drain and it was on its way back up. Kind of couple questions, like how does that happen and why does that happen?
Yeah, so in the 80s, there was, this was a macro issue where cities, they were building, so post-war, developers started developing new communities outside of cities, right? And because it was easy to build houses, and there was just available land, and you could build houses and pop them in, people would buy them, move on to the next development. You make your money that way. And in some ways, that's how cities have developed for the past 100 years. Even Irvington developed that way. But it really, in the 50s and 60s, when car culture started taking over, that's when they started building neighborhoods that didn't have streetlights, and they might have had streetlights, but they didn't have sidewalks. And the houses were built with the doors, not facing the street, and there weren't walkways up, right? So you had this decades of housing stock that was borderline antisocial, that was built in the donuts around the city, right? And then when we could get super deep on this, but there's redlining issues and racial access to housing that all comes into play here. But when those neighborhoods started to lose their value, right? People started moving out, then they'd move out further, so they'd leave Irvington and they'd go to Warren. And then in the 70s and then in the more like 80s and 90s, then that lack of investment, that housing stock got a little older. People said, "Oh well, we need a new house. This house is we don't want to put a new roof on this house. We don't want to put new water heater, blah 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 blah."
Right.
So they said, "Well, let's just build a new house." And so they built a new house out in Hancock County or Hendricks County.
Gotcha.
And then those houses are the new houses. And then now it's still like that's the basic idea behind urban sprawl.
Gotcha.
And so that's what happened was they had housing stock, and then that just becomes a death spiral the further in you go. So then as the people move out, the people who can't afford to move out stay, and then, you know, there's a lack of investment in the schools, and then the schools just get worse and worse and worse. And so it's just how do we fix? We have a number of fundamental issues in the city right now, and some of it can be fixed through crime prevention and that stuff, but a lot of it for me comes back to economic development and investing in our neighborhoods and making sure that people are able to stay where they live, but also that they can get equity in their houses so that if they want to leave, they can profit off of the development that's happening around them. So I think that's, having seen that in Irvington, and we had Marsh and a million other mom and pop stores that came and went. But you can really see once that investment starts to happen in the neighborhood, that people start caring more about their houses, or people have opportunity to care more about the houses, right? So it's, I think we could talk about this for days, but
Gotcha. Cool.
So transitioning from Indianapolis, super cool to learn about all of that stuff that we didn't even know, and quite frankly, probably most of people who live here don't even know. Music. So you do a lot with music. You've mentioned the music family tree. I don't know if you've mentioned on the show yet or not, but the indie music strategy. Music. Talk about that, and your passion and all of that stuff behind it.
So I guess how that comes full circle was I was working at the Indy Chamber and working in economic development. And then another piece of economic development that's I would say equally important to nuts and bolts, let's attract company A and get B amount of jobs, right, is that we need to understand the quality of life that we're creating for people in our city. And that's what's driving economic development more so now than a traditional, we're going to give this incentive to this company to come here and stay for X amount of years, right? So you could think of it this way as, and I will get to music, I promise.
No, you're good.
But think of it this way. So in the NBA, right, you have an opportunity to, you go hire a free agent, lock them down for a couple of years. Now it's becoming even more like 1-year deals, and then they're out the door, right? Or you can draft a player and hope that you get the right player and that they can stay, and then then things are stacked in your favor to keep them. Well, it's the same way in economic development, and so it's if you have people you have companies that are being created in your city, and so if you can make those workers and those companies feel like they can grow and be successful here, they'll stay. And those companies are more likely to invest in the community. Their workers are more likely to be a part of the community, and they won't leave. Once you're pulling in companies from other states, like that's still always going to be a part of the game, but they're less likely to stay. They're less likely to be invested in the community. So at the end of the day, what we want to do is create environments for businesses to be successful, right? And so in order to do that, we need to do things that maybe we hadn't done before. And so that's investing in the coffee shops and the restaurants and the stuff that Catherine's doing, frankly, with commercial, retail, and a big piece of that is creative economy. And so Indy Chamber commissioned a Creative Economies report in 2015, and it recommended that the city pursue a few different avenues to better understand the creative economies and how we can invest differently. One of them was film, and Visit Indy ran with something called Film Indy to understand the film community in Indianapolis, what the barriers are, how they can be successful, and I was a part of that. The state of Indiana doesn't have a film incentive, and Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky all do. And so trying to get that film incentive reinstated, that was all their work. The next thing was music, and it was like, well, I'm a musician. I just joined this group, Musical Family Tree. Maybe we'll pursue this and see what's going on. So we found a group called SoundDiplomacy out of London that their specialty was looking at music policy and understanding the economic impact of music in a city. So we went to Memphis to one of their conventions, and we're just blown away both by the level of the presentations that were being given on stuff that's happening internationally, but also the fact that, like, as an economic development professional in Indianapolis, we say that we want to be on par with, we want to be competing with the Austins and the Denvers and the Charlottes of the world. And they were all there presenting on the stuff that they'd been doing for years, and we just showed up, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, where are you? You're from Indianapolis? Oh, well, why are you here, right? And so it was like, well, screw you, we need to go back home and kick some ass. And so so it was Josh Baker went, Seth Johnson, who's a music journalist for Nuvo. He was actually working for Musical Family Tree then. Aaron Jeter, who worked for Musical Family Tree. Owen Thomas, who's a local artist. He runs a company called Absorb. And then myself and Ian Nicolini with the Chamber went. And so it was like, well, wow, crap, we got to do a lot. And we brought Sound Diplomacy here the next year to do kind of a local version to say, hey, we need to kick up what's happening here a notch and really drive communication between different genres and break down barriers. So they came, and we had Music Cities Forum in May of 18, I think, and at the Hi-Fi, and it was like a whole day of presentations by local artists. And then we had also people come from Austin and Denver and London to present. And then the next step from that was, hey, well, let's work with Sound Diplomacy to really understand the city and where music is in the city and what's going on. So we spent the next year and a half. I was project manager on the Indie Music Strategy. The basic idea was to map the ecology and the economy of music in Indianapolis. Gotcha. So nobody's ever done this before. And so we could say, well, we have a good hip-hop scene because I can name a few people that were from here, or we have a good, we think we do good at this, or we think we have a lot of people doing this, so we must have good studios. But, like, we had no baseline metric for understanding what we had, let alone how we could compare that with other communities. And so Sound Diplomacies worked in a number of cities worldwide, and so they were able to kind of say, hey, well, we looked at Charlotte and Atlanta and Boston and New Orleans and San Francisco, and this is how you stack up with those folks. So there was a lot involved in that. And then it was supposed to be announced we were going to have an event in May of 20 where we talked about the announcements of everything that was coming out of that, and issued the report and did all this stuff, and then COVID came in and just destroyed
is that
everything.
Still gonna happen though?
So I mean, I'm not running that anymore since I'm not at the Chamber. Susanna Taft is running that, and they do plan to release it, I think, soon. Cool. So the report's done, but it's just a matter of, like, how do you talk about something when in a week we went from having a $1.19 billion music industry in Marion County to having a net loss of a music industry, right? Fortunately, I will say the work that we did in uniting the industry and community in Indianapolis did pay dividends at the end of 19 and beginning of 20, and it did allow us to be in a position so that when the crisis hit, Indianapolis is one of the only cities in the state that issued direct money to music venues to help. Josh Baker was able to set up the Indiana Independent Venue Alliance, which is, again, a conglomeration of venues across the state. A lot of them in Marion County, but there's, the Fort Wayne and Terre Haute and Bloomington. But they meet weekly. Actually, they're meeting literally right now on calls, and they talk about, hey, what are you seeing? What's the protocols where you're at? How, what grant money are you getting? What's your community doing? This is what we're doing, da-da-da-da. And that allowed the industry to be in a position to then lobby nationally to Congress and say, hey, when we do the COVID bill, we need money directly for music venues
Yeah.
and music economy, because we have been disproportionately impacted, maybe more than anyone.
Sure.
We were the first to shut down, and we still don't even know when we can really reopen, right?
Wow.
And so Musical Family Tree was able to jump in along with the city of Indianapolis and allocate CARES Act funds twice. We did almost $500,000 of to 17 venues the first time, and I think 21 the second time. And that really, like, that sounds like a lot of money, but it really just gave them a few more months of hanging on, basically. Right. So fortunately, we were in a position to be able to do that. We couldn't have done that if we hadn't done all of this work before.
Right.
You know, I wish we could have taken it to the next level and gone nuts with the Final Four and the
awesome.
NBA All-Star Game, and like the stuff that was in the works for music in this city that never happened and probably never will happen. It's a major bummer, but I mean, we'll get back. I'm confident that in the next year-ish, things will turn back on, and the music industry part's going to be tough because of the way touring is such an important part of how artists make money, because they don't make money off of music sales anymore because everyone uses Spotify and they don't get paid for that. So they have to tour basically to support themselves. And then the entire industry is built around that. And that was just completely shut off. So whenever they turn that back on, right? Like, let's say they turn it on today. They say, hey, music venues can open. Okay, well, they can't open today. They they can for the first 6 months of whatever the recovery is, it's going to be 100% local. You know, unless some national person lives, unless John Mellencamp wants to come up here and play a show.
Right.
The touring takes months to set up. You know, cities have first priority over us, right? Like, so it's going to take a while because you got all the shows that were scheduled and postponed. And then new artists that have had releases that want to do tours behind that. So everything's backlogged. So it's going to be insane. Ticket prices are probably going to be through the roof, but we're going to need to pay, you know, music venues are going to have to make up for months and months and months of lost revenue just to survive. So right now we're basically in triage of like, let's save as many venues as we can that they can still be here. And then probably this summer, we got to come out and support like local music in a way that we have never done before. And that could be really cool, unplanned, you know, investment into the local music community, and we'll see where the bands go from there. But there's a lot of people are going to have to make a lot of money in this summer for venues to be able to hang on.
I'm curious. We had a guest. Was it the second guest? I think Jake Huber. He did the videography for Music in Transit. I'm curious if you were a part of that or oversaw any of that at all.
No, I didn't. I did. It was an awesome program. I think Square Cat had something to do with the programming of that.
Did some.
And then we pushed it through our socials, but we didn't really have, that kind of existed on its own. And that's the amazing thing about that I learned, and it was almost overwhelming, was that like, hey, I'm a musician and I'm with Musical Family Tree, and like I know like all of my friends are musicians, and so I would be a great person to talk about music in Indianapolis. And then you get into it and you're like, holy crap, there's like every day I'm learning about a whole new scene of people that I don't even know that like feel left out because I didn't talk to them, but it's like this you know, never-ending onion that you just keep peeling, and there's more layers and layers and layers and layers. And so Indianapolis has a super vibrant we had a super vibrant, amazing live music scene, and then there's music out there that most people don't even know of, right? So everybody has their own little niche. And I would say one thing that I would like to see, and that I was trying to drive when I was with the music strategy, was all ages shows. Like that's a major issue in Indianapolis, where we don't have enough places for people to have shows. So we have a lack of diversity, both in genres represented and in geographic diversity.
Gotcha.
And so it would be amazing to me if we could figure out how to have a Hoosier Dome, 4 Hoosier Domes on every side of the city.
Yeah.
And that, the kids could just go to, and like when I was a kid, we went to, there's a place called the Emerson, which is still in existence. Hopefully it'll bounce back after the pandemic.
Yeah.
But, you go to these places and maybe the kids not every kid wants to go to a football game and, do the stuff that every other kid does. And so if you don't give them space to do things with their friends, that's when they start to become, things get destructive, or they go into places where they're not supposed to be, people get in trouble. Like, really, if we gave kids a space that was safe and that they felt they could be welcomed at, I think amazing things could happen.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Curious if there was any one piece of advice that you could give to anyone that was either entering the economics standpoint of things, like developing the city, or the music standpoint, or community development. What one piece of advice would you give that person that's just starting out or pursuing that?
So I would say in either one, just never burn any bridges. Like Indianapolis is a big city, but it's also a very small city. And the internet makes it easier for people to just make some shitty comment about somebody or whatever. And then you become... then you're burning bridges to people that maybe could help you in the future.
Gotcha.
So that's true in music, and then that's doubly true in public service or economic development or whatever, right? Like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And so again, if I'd been a total asshole in high school and was had some falling out with Catherine, right? It's like, well, she hates me. She's not going to hire me to do an internship.
Exactly.
And that's like somebody that was 10 years later, and somebody that I would have never guessed that I would have connected with professionally. Now we're really good friends. And just like, especially if you're staying in your hometown, maybe you can get away with it if you go out to other places, but just everybody's on their own trip, and try to help people and just don't be a jerk. And, I think that goes a long way.
It really does. I agree.
Definitely.
I agree.
I think that we learned more here than we've learned in the
I
last
was gonna say,
6 months.
Informational.
I love
as
it.
gets,
I love it. It's super exciting to learn more about the city that we come from and kind of where it's going from an insider's point of view, which is really, really cool. So thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, cool.
If there's people out there that maybe want to contact you or your services or get a hold of kind of what you're doing music-wise, development-wise, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, probably my Twitter handle is pretty public, at Jim_Fix. Or you could email me if you want to talk about work stuff.
Okay.
Jay Rawlinson at the Veritas Group. I'm pretty out there. You can get to me if you want to.
Perfect. And we'll link all of that as well for
Absolutely.
you.
So, want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. It was really, really exciting.
It was a great time.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you guys for watching. We hope you guys tune in next week for the next episode. We look forward to having you. See you in the next one.